I'm going to start off by saying I have played both. I have played both. Beaten both of them. Not 100% of them, but I have beaten both of them. So, Dragon's Dogma is like one of my favorite games. Skyrim's up there too. Both are really heavily adventure games, combat, big kind of story deals. I think Skyrim has had a lot more commercial play. It's been shown a lot more around. Obviously, there's the running joke that they're just going to keep releasing Skyrim on each and every new console that comes out 300 times. But both are pretty good games, but I do think Dragon's Dogma does not get as much love as I think it should. I got a few talking points. I've kind of discussed, my opinion on kind of each one. First off is going to be adventure. So, like I said, both of them are very heavily adventure games. Both have, a big evil dragon coming out of nowhere and, messing the whole town up and doing all that kind of stuff. And adventure-wise, I think I'm going to kind of just say it's a little bit more towards Skyrim. I will say Skyrim. Both are good at, exploring the world and all that kind of stuff, but I will say Skyrim, when it comes to adventure, it really always does feel like you're going and finding new places. You're going out and you're exploring caves, dungeons, stuff like that. There's a lot more stuff to find and explore in Skyrim versus Dragon's Dogma. Next point is going to be music, and that one definitely goes to Skyrim. Skyrim just has a lot more music versus combat, exploring. Towns, pubs, all that kind of stuff. It has just, it has one of the most iconic themes too. Da, 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 da. It has just one of those things up there with like Halo's freaking theme song. It has a lot of good ambiance music. Going across places at nighttime. Caverns. Exploring stuff. Dragon's Dogma does have music, but a lot of the time it you don't hear it. There's a few spots where it really doesn't seem to have any, and there's other points where you don't really notice it as much as everything else. Like, one of the best songs that it has is just its opening theme. Like, that's one of the coolest songs I've had in a game. But unfortunately, it just really does not match Skyrim's music. Skyrim just has a lot better music going for it. Another point is going to be combat. So both have combat, and both do it very differently. Skyrim is a lot more of a hack and slash sort of deal. You got different ways of doing combat. There's a lot more variety with it. But Dragon's Dogma is a lot more intuitive. There's a lot more going for it. You can jump and climb on bosses, Shadow of the Colossus style. You can use different kinds of weapons. Their magic, I would say, is a lot better. And it's just, it feels a lot more like a combat scenario versus just at a guy until he falls down dead. Whereas in, Dragon's Dogma, it really does feel like combat. You strike an enemy and they could recoil, they could get flown back, they could do this, they could do that. It actually feels more like a combat, scenario versus just bashing a guy in the face with a giant warhammer and him just come back at you with one of his own attacks. It doesn't feel all that, entertaining. That's why, honestly, a lot of times when I play Skyrim and I try to do a long playthrough, I eventually get bored because the combat itself is just very repetitive and there's no real difference in it. It's usually just, take out a weapon, shoot some spells, fly an arrow. It's very simple. So the combat is not all that good in Skyrim. I will say, though, they have a lot more weapon varieties versus in Dragon's Dogma, where it's just kind of simple. The world itself, that goes to Skyrim. So just map-wise, I'm going to say it's like twice the size of the Dragon's Dogma map. And there's just a lot more different areas to explore. You have mountain areas, you have forests, lakes, rivers, you have towns, you have, winter areas, kind of more summer, bright sunny areas, versus in Dragon's Dogma, to where there's, you have a few forests, you have some open hills, you have like a town or two, you have some abandoned forts. It's not a whole lot to explore. You have some hidden areas like caverns and stuff, but nothing that really is big and expansive like Skyrim is. I mean, in Skyrim you have multiple holds, you have towns, you have all kinds of stuff. Versus, besides like, Castardis and Grand Soren, there's not really many big towns you can really go out and explore, which really does kind of make it a little bit more boring. But I will say that, both do a very good job in building their world itself. While Dragon's Dogma's world might not be as big and expansive and varied as Skyrim, it does a good job on it. Next one is going to be the enemies. Now, both actually has a pretty good variety of enemies. I mean, in Skyrim you have Spriggans, you have werewolves, your usual bandits, you have wolves, you have sorcerers, the undead, draugrs, you have all kinds of stuff. And then Dragon's Dogma, you got wolves, giant spiders, you got phantoms, you got chimeras, griffins, and unfortunately I'm going to have to give this one to Dragon's Dogma. So, like I said, in Dragon's Dogma you can climb and jump on the enemies, and when you're going up against a giant chimera or a flying griffin or, the cockatrice, there is a lot of, fun things you can do. Like, you can jump on the backside of a chimera and just whack at its snake tail until it, you cut it off. Skyrim, not so much. A lot of the enemies do have different varying attacks, but a lot of times you're either going up against a bandit or the undead. There's not a huge variety in terms of, of combat versus just, some bandits might have magic or this or that, but it's pretty much the same in Dragon's Dogma. Some might have magic, some might use a bow, some might just use, melee attacks. But unfortunately, Dragon's Dogma just does a lot better with the enemies. Further down in the game, it's kind of just reskins for some of them, like you go from the wolves to the dire wolves to the hellhounds, but, they might, just have a kind of a different reskin, but they also do get tougher, and their attacks do vary. It's not just, Spriggan, or, Draugr, or, of course, for a lot of that stuff, you get higher ones, like you get Bandit, Warlord, or whatever, stuff like that, so it does get better, but unfortunately, it's not a huge variety, nor as fun to fight as in Dragon's Dogma. Next talking point is going to be weapons. So, like I said, both of them have a lot of different weapons, but unfortunately, it really only seems to be Skyrim that has a lot better variety. Both you can use swords, axes, and hammers, but in Skyrim it really does seem like there's just a little bit better stuff you can do with them. Like the sword, axe, and hammer all have different attack speeds and different attack strengths. You can actually increase their damage or add like a fire or whatever attack to it. So there's a lot more stuff you can really do with the weapons versus in Dragon's Dogma, to where you have your bow, because you only have like 3 main classes: sorcerer, ranger, and warrior or fighter, whatever you want to call it. Basically, it's a magic user, long range, or weapons. And for the warrior, he does have different weapons. He can use like maces and axes. I think it was axes. But really, they all kind of attack the same way. There really doesn't seem to be any difference in them, other than just attack strength, but that's not really due to the different weapon. It's more just due to it might being the stronger weapon. So weapons, I will say, are a lot better in Skyrim, because really the only thing you can do in Dragon's Dogma is just increase the weapon's damage, in its attributes, but you can't really do anything after that. Next one is going to be powers. So this is going to be like magic. So in Skyrim, of course, you have the fireball bolts, you have, healing spells, invisibility. You have a lot of stuff that is good for that particular game, but I'm going to go ahead and say that Dragon's Dogma itself has way better magic. So in Dragon's Dogma, the magic actually feels like powerful magic. I can call down, lightning storms. I can, create giant miasmas. I can do, give my my allies fire, weapons or dark weapons. I can, do all kinds of different magic attacks. And the magic actually feels like really powerful magic versus just being able to shoot a fireball, maybe it explodes, or just kind of doing things like that. And unlike in Skyrim, the magic you can do in, Dragon's Dogma, it's easier to acquire, and it doesn't take a lot of stupid things. Like, if I want to reanimate, a Draugr, A lot of times you have to be even stronger than it or something like that. So there might be a more, variety when it comes to spells and stuff in Skyrim, but I will say they're just not as powerful nor as cool looking as in Dragon's Dogma. Next one is going to be story, and hands down, Dragon's Dogma for me. So both of them, like I said, have pretty much the same thing starting. You have a big old dragon coming out of nowhere, messing up the whole town, and, your story kind of starts from there. But I think really that's where it differs. Grigori is way more menacing than Alduin ever was. Alduin was like in the way Alduin was just the same as any other dragon. He was supposed to be stronger, but he really didn't seem like that. He was just kind of just cooler looking, more metal, whatever. But he didn't really seem that much of a threat versus Grigori, who comes in, massive, like mountain-sized dragon, takes your heart, and granted, he does disappear for a while, and he's not reviving a bunch of dragons, but the whole thing is trying to stop him. And the story is just a lot darker. There's really doesn't seem to be any dark turns in Skyrim versus in Dragon's Dogma, to where you can be accused of doing something you didn't do. You face a cult trying to bring about the end of the world. The story in Dragon's Dogma is probably not as long as Skyrim's is, but it definitely has a lot more of an impact versus, Alduin coming in and just kind of doing nothing. Gameplay-wise, that's going to be a difficult one, because both do the adventure aspect. Both do a pretty good job at exploring. Combat-wise, while Dragon's Dogma is a little bit better, I will say Skyrim, there's just a lot more areas to explore, but I'm going to say Dragon's Dogma. Between the ability to have pawns, being able to, attract, gain different allies, being able to go through the different pawns, just all the different monsters, the different, ways you can fight. I will say Dragon's Dogma, because Dragon's Dogma feels like they put in a lot more efforts to make combat more fun, to make, exploring a lot more fun. Even though if Skyrim does have more places to explore, really it's just like you can find a new place like every 10 feet. So really it does lose its appeal after a while. Characters, Skyrim. Unfortunately for Dragon's Dogma, there wasn't really a big emphasis on characters. I mean, you have the Duke, you have the Duke's wife, you have, Selene the witch, you have a few different characters, but really none of them make a very big impact. Like, very towards the end, half the time, I remember one time, I ended up having to save a person I didn't even really recognize. And usually it's the person you do the most quest for, or you do the most help with. So I didn't recognize who this person was, so I'm just like, who the hell are you, when I first came up? And Skyrim just has a way better variety of characters, because in a lot of different towns, you just have a lot of different people, to talk to and all that. So they definitely do have more people. Main ability. So in Skyrim, it is, the Thuum, you have the voice. Versus in Dragon's Dogma, where you have the ability to summon pawns. So this is where it kind of becomes a little bit confusing to me personally, because with a Thuum you have a lot of different abilities. You can call down storms, you can summon dragons, turn yourself invisible, blow people off a cliff, just with your voice alone. And in Dragon's Dogma, you can kind of just recruit people. Granted, you can recruit far stronger people than you if you have the necessary resources and stuff like that, but you can't really do much else. And I think really that's what separates it from Skyrim, because unfortunately, Skyrim's main ability of being able to use the Thuum is just a lot better. There's a lot more fun to use it versus the pawns, where I really don't have any control over them, versus telling them to go attack or to come back and help me, or to, stuff like that. So the main ability is definitely going to be Skyrim. Overall, I honestly really just prefer to play Dragon's Dogma. With Skyrim, it's a lot of fun going out to explore and to meet the people, to gain, find new weapons and stuff like that. But when it comes to the combat, it gets so repetitive over time that it's just really not all that fun. And it becomes to a certain point to where really nothing can affect you. Like, I remember getting to a few points where it takes one or two swings from my Warhammer to kill an enemy, and at that point it just wasn't all that fun. Versus in Dragon's Dogma, to where the world might not be as expansive, you might not have as many interesting characters to look at, and, you know, the combat might be a little bit more advanced, you know, and all that, but I just gotta say Dragon's Dogma. Between the story and between just the threat of it, because, like I said, Grigori, first of all, Grigori doesn't look like any of the other dragons in Dragon's Dogma. Grigori is this massive dragon who can use magic, you know, just powerful due to his size and can breathe flames. You know, you can't, you know, there wasn't really any special ability you needed to take him down, versus in, you know, in Skyrim, where Alduin looks just like every other dragon. He's not any bigger, he's not any more advanced, he just looks more spiky and black. You know, and Dragonrend, it wasn't even anything interesting. It's like, it says it like yanks at the soul or something like that, but all it really does is bring the dragon to the ground. So you gotta go through this long, you know, mission just to get something that pulls a dragon to the ground. You know, and Alduin was never really big of a threat. The first time I ever played through Skyrim, I ended up getting down to that level and just killing him instantly. It wasn't a challenge. And that's the big problem. Like, I feel like the final boss should not be easy, just because you're a high level. Grigori was never easy for me. Granted, he wasn't, you know, dragon blood boiling hard, but he wasn't just easy. Versus in Skyrim, where I didn't even have to really do anything because the people that was with me killed him for me. And even the second time, just a few attacks and he was pretty much halfway dead. Alduin was never that big of a threat. He didn't really have any more abilities that really made him dangerous. You know, versus Grigori, as soon as you get into a fight with him, you realize he's different from the chimeras, the drakes, the wyverns, everything. There is nothing in the game that is even close to him. But Alduin, he just felt like every other dragon. He just might have had an extra ability or two and was part of the main story. But, you know, like I said, both games are pretty fun, both have their strengths, both have their weaknesses, but if I really had to choose a game to play a lot more, I would probably have to go for Dragon's Dogma if I wanted to combat, but Skyrim if I wanted to explore. It's really hard to choose, but I'd really have to go for Dragon's Dogma, because just the combat's a lot more fun, and even if, like, 20 hours into the game, things don't really change, at the very least, you can do different things, and the combat always feels a lot more fun because they add different things on. I think the one time I ended up having fun in a combat in Skyrim was when I was running away from one dragon just to get chased by another two. I think I remember if I was getting chased by like 2 hag ravens and a bunch of other enemies. Like, I was getting bombarded with a bunch of enemies. I don't know how that happened. But it's a fun game. Both have their abilities, and I would still listen to the Dragonborn song anytime I can. Anyways, bye.